In this story, follow a profound journey through the pain of loss, the shock of a poisoned inheritance, and wounds that bleed, through faith without a church, and a house that no longer holds either the living or the dead. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a single moment of the stories to come. The sun was setting sadly behind the apartment blocks when I felt the phone vibrate, clutching me to its chest like a cold claw. My mother didn't like texting. Her voice cracked through the noises of the street, and the words got stuck in my throat, burning like a cigarette but extinguished on my tongue. I kept walking toward my studio apartment, but the stairs turned into quicksand, and the key rang like a funeral bell as I unlocked the door. I looked at the clock. 18 minutes. That's how long it took to shatter my universe. The bus the next morning smelled of hairspray and resigned sweat. I counted the rails on the road until the silhouette of my father, leaning on the gate of the house, made everything tremble again. I saw him from a distance, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his Sunday clothes, as if he wanted to tear out his chest and throw it next to the pile of carnations on the table. My mother moved through the house like an automaton, placing white napkins under vases, wiping dust off the frames of the photograph where my grandmother smiled in her wedding dress, stained by time at the church. The light from the priest's rain hat mixed with the glimmer of the old women's white hair as they whispered her name like a prayer. I held in my arms half of the roses my grandmother hated, too red, too sharp, like the lips of a silent movie actress. When the coffin descended, I suddenly saw her young again, in the lap of the old priest who made the sign of the cross with a trembling hand. The wet earth clung to my shoes like her hand on my crown when she woke me for Christmas service. The memory overwhelmed me later, when I found in my coat pocket a little silk scarf she wore to church, folded like a butterfly trapped between the pages of a prayer book. I clenched it in my palm until the golden threads on its edges began to burn me. The shadow of the old house stretched over us like a shroud as we stepped inside, followed by the priest and the clotted smell of incense that stalked our shoulders. The relatives melted away one by one. The priest remained in the doorway, carefully peeling a document from inside a book of rituals. The paper looked old, its edges torn like dried lilac wings, and the ink of my grandmother's signature stretched across the page like a black spider's thread. His words flowed like lime covering a grave cross. "This house belongs to the Holy Church." The air suddenly thickened, turning into glue that clogged my nostrils. I watched my mother clutching the pillow on which my grandmother rested her head while watching TV, her fingers digging into the fabric until it began to fray. The silence swelled until it cracked under the unheard scream of my father, whose body shook like a tree under an axe, his inner leaves scattering on the floor where he used to play with his mother when snow covered the windows halfway. The priest left behind a dust of requiem, and the document remained on the kitchen table, sticking to the wooden surface like a venomous octopus. I opened the drawer where my grandmother kept her glasses and lace handkerchief, and a smell of lavender and heart pills burst out, but the box of important documents, the one she kept under the wardrobe, was gone. Replaced, probably, by this paper where legal oaths glimmered like poison under the light of the bulb. I went up to my grandmother's room, where the drawn curtains shrouded the bed in which she had died. On the nightstand, the icon of the Virgin Mary bore a dried tea stain in the right corner, a signature I had left there long ago. The walls now seemed foreign, warping under my gaze like witnesses hiding a secret. How had the priest convinced her to sign? On what day? With what words? Did her hand tremble as she drew the white circle of death around our name, giving everything to an institution with frozen walls and empty pews? My father began taking down the photos from the walls, but instead of putting them in boxes, he placed them one by one on the windowsill, face down. My mother was washing coffee cups that were already clean, and I remained in the doorway, clutching the little silk scarf in my fist, feeling the wall between me and my grandmother rise suddenly, brick by brick, until I saw her not as a woman but as an impenetrable wall I had futilely chipped away at for years. Our house was turning into her second grave, and all that was left for us was to drag our memories out the door, like white ants driven from their nest. And my grandmother's faith smelled of melted wax and dried tears on icons. I remembered her kissing the church threshold 3 times before entering, as if each bow was a step toward heaven. But now I wondered if those knees, worn out on cold mosaics, were not actually marks of bondage, not prayer. The church had taught her to renounce the earth but not her pain. When she signed the paper, her hand wrapped in prayer beads, did she feel the bones of her grandfather, long buried in foreign soil, pulling her back toward that silent anger that had made her run to the altar to escape his shadow. The priest now seemed like an extension of the long wooden bench where I used to sit as a child, afraid it might creak. I had noticed his right hand, with a thick silver ring shaped like a chain, pressing down on the document to smooth out any wrinkle of doubt. In his eyes, I read a haste that did not belong to heaven but to earth, the quiet greed of institutions that swallow houses like wafers, turning them into numbers in ledgers. He had wrapped his cross in the shroud of her death to hide it. My father was now rummaging through the bedroom drawer, unearthing old news, birth certificates, letters from the army, a photograph of my grandfather in a summer suit, smiling next to a car with wide fenders like scales. I saw his fingers twitch when he found it, as if the paper had burned him. My grandmother had cut his face out of all the pictures after their separation, but she had forgotten to rid herself of this piece of memory that clung to life like a parasite. When she donated the house, did she see my mother, me, or that masculine face she had excommunicated from history? At night, as I spread the sheets on the living room couch, I heard my mother muttering prayers under her broken breath. Not for my grandmother's soul, but for our sins, for the doubts that gnawed at us like moths in empty closets. I turned my head toward the window, where the acacia branches scratched the glass like bare fingers. The house no longer offered us shelter but watched us with its piercing windows, now transformed into the eyes of the church. Every crack in the plaster seemed like a verse from a psalm I didn't understand. In the nightstand drawer, next to the little silk scarf, I found a small notebook with a torn cover. Its pages were filled with notes about fasts, services, and quotes from psalms, but between them, a few abrupt words emerged. Lord, why can't I forget? I wonder if he ever cried. The last entry, with ink smudged by tears, dated a month before her death. Forgiveness is a door. I couldn't open it. But maybe the Holy Virgin. I closed the notebook like a rocket that could destroy everything I thought I knew about her. The church had given her a language to dress her wounds but had not healed them. And now, through her will, she had tried to turn pain into piety, to buy her place near the altar with the only thing that had bound us to her, the walls where we were born. In the morning, as the sun rose like a host in the sky, I saw my mother packing the pots from the windowsill. Each one seemed like a small, mute bell, ready to ring for another service. My father sat on the stairs, watching the priest's expensive car slowly pass by on the street, like a crow inspecting its prey before settling. And I remained with the notebook clutched to my chest, feeling my grandmother's faith turn to dust between my fingers, leaving behind only a human, all too human heartbeat that neither the church, nor the house, nor death could bury. The last boxes seemed to bleed onto the bare floor, leaving dust trails like thin scars. I pulled out my grandmother's empty drawer and shut it with a snap that echoed through all the rooms, a reverberation of church doors I no longer wished to hear. The house now breathed through the vents, a faint, hoarse whistle, as if the walls were deflating their soul in preparation to become strangers. Dad left the keys on the kitchen table, next to a carefully folded napkin, the last trace of habit left by Mom, who had tried to civilize the collapse. On the sidewalk, next to the car packed to the brim, I looked up at the window of my grandmother's room. The sun reflected in it like a gold coin tossed by someone from the sky, but the glass seemed darkened, as if the house had closed its eyes. When the engine started, I felt a knot of strings cut somewhere in my chest, leaving me to breathe suddenly, too deeply, like a convict learning their sentence has been commuted. At my maternal grandparents' house, a place crammed with dolls from another era and paintings of alpine landscapes, I placed my box of books next to the guest bed. Mom hung Grandma's icon in the bathroom, where the steam from the shower would fog it up daily. Dad sat on the porch to unpack boxes. On the bus to university, I held my bag tightly to my chest, with Grandma's diary buried between textbooks. The churches we passed along the way now seemed like fortresses with crooked windows, their spires like scolding fingers. I got off 2 stops early to avoid one that smelled of burnt sweet bread, Grandma's favorite scent after liturgy. In my studio apartment, I hung her silk hat on the ceiling lamp. When I turned on the light, its shadow danced on the wall like a faceless silhouette, and the golden threads shimmered like tiny stitches of reproach. I began reading psalms on my phone, but only the ones Grandma avoided, the ones about mercy and forgiveness, not fear and punishment. My faith has become a sliver of candlelight I hold in my palm, sheltered from the wind. Sometimes, when I pass by the campus church, I stop to gaze at the sky through the cross atop the steeple. That sky belongs to no institution. It's blue and raw, full of clouds that resemble no saint from the books. I remember Grandma telling me that angels live in the clouds, but now I see them as giant butterflies, free to change shape or fade away. Grandma's diary lies under my pillow, open to the entry about forgiveness. Sometimes I open it and touch the dried tea stain, trying to discern whether the tear beside it fell from an eye or a cup. I no longer hate the church. Not even the priest. I see them as shattered mirrors of a God too vast to fit into rituals. Grandma worshipped the earth, but I hold my prayers in the air, like unplanted seeds, perhaps carried by the wind to a place where houses cannot be robbed, and faith need not be notarized. Grandma's house remains behind, but its shadow still follows me like an unfinished psalm. Sometimes I wonder if I was wrong to leave it without a fight, or if that fight would have turned even the last memories to ash. My faith has become a wildflower, growing in the cracks of concrete, unaware of the sanctified name of the soil in which it sprouted. And now, I ask you, what would you have done in our place? Would you have silently accepted Grandma's will, or would you have snatched the paper from the priest's hand, demanding he stop reading? Who do you think betrayed whom? Grandma, the family, the church grandma, or perhaps everyone cheated heaven a little? Would you still trust the church? Leave a comment with your thoughts. If this story moved you, give it a like and share it with someone who has learned that sometimes faith can burn brighter than incense. And if you want to hear how my journey continues among the ruins left by silent inheritances, subscribe and hit the bell. For in this world, every abandoned house has a story waiting to be cracked open, like a nut with its kernel hidden inside.